So I know that you keep up on this stuff, but we've watched Musk and Michael Saylor and everybody's saying that Bitcoin's going to continue to go up as the dollar inflates. Now, this is really your strike zone. Obviously, they're kind of using this again. Like the dollar for sure is going to inflate. I think we all agree on that. At least you and I do. Why are some of these big names jumping in now? We're seeing obviously MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor. We see Musk with Tesla, and
but remember, that's hardly anybody. Yeah, there's Michael Saylor. Yeah, there's Elon Musk. But what percent of the S&P 500, CEOs are into Bitcoin? I mean, maybe it's just those two guys. I mean, you have a little bit with Square and Twitter. Jack Dorsey's controlling both companies, so I can throw him in there. But Square is utilizing Bitcoin to some extent. So I mean, there's a reason that they might be talking about it. But you're talking about a very small but highly vocal minority. So when you say everybody's talking about it, they're not. I mean, a lot of people are talking about it, but they're not buying it. The only ones that are buying it are, the Elon Musks and the Michael Saylors. But of course, once these guys buy it, they can't stop talking about it because they have to keep talking about it because they got to talk it up. They've got to get more people to buy because there is no actual use case for Bitcoin. There's no real market for it like there is for gold. The only market is people who think the price is going to go up. And the only way the price will go up is if more people buy. And the only way that people who already own it can get out of it is if they have new buyers to sell it to. So that's why Michael Saylor has to constantly pound the table. He does any interview. I mean, no matter who requests him, he will do any podcast, no matter how small. He is 24/7 Bitcoin promoter. I mean, who the hell's running MicroStrategy? I mean, maybe he's doing this whole thing as a distraction because maybe his software company is failing. And so he turned it into a Bitcoin ETF. And all he does is tout Bitcoin. That's his basic job now, is to try to pump this thing up. But once you get beyond these big pumpers, it's just a distraction for most companies. I mean, they look at it, but they've got nothing to do with it. And to answer your question about will it be an inflation hedge? No, I don't think it's an inflation hedge at all. I mean, I think people are marketing it as a hedge against inflation, but the reason gold is a hedge against inflation or anything like real estate or something like that is that those are real things. And so when you print more paper, right, now the price of all the things that you buy with paper goes up, right? And commodities are usually some of the most, the first reactors. You print more money and now food gets more expensive or energy gets more expensive. But when you have gold, you're owning one of those commodities that is going to go up in price with inflation. As you print more money, you need more money to buy gold. You need more money to buy a house. You need more money to buy oil or wheat or copper or anything. So gold is an inflation hedge because it gets you out of paper into something real that has some kind of relationship to all the other commodities or other assets. But Bitcoin isn't real. It has no relationship to anything. There is no historic, metric that says how many Bitcoins should it take to buy a house? How many Bitcoins should it take, to buy an ounce of gold or a barrel of oil? I mean, there's no relationship, but you can go back over history and say, hey, how much should the average house cost in terms of gold? Right? How many ounces of gold should it take to buy a house? How much gold do you need to buy oil or to buy wheat or to buy copper? I mean, you can go back for hundreds of years or more, and you can kind of look at this and say, okay, well, if paper is going to collapse and I got to get out of paper and I want to store my purchasing power to buy the things that I need in the future, well, I'll buy gold because gold will hold on to its purchasing power. And then I can use my gold to buy a house or to buy the things that I need. Because if I'm just holding on to dollars, paper, I may not be able to buy anything because the paper can lose so much value. But I think people who think Bitcoin is going to behave like gold are wrong. I mean, first of all, it's not behaving anything like gold now. It just goes straight up. Gold doesn't do that.
10x in a year,
Bitcoin
right?
is just marches to its own drum. It's a pure speculative mania. And we could have a huge outbreak of inflation where gold goes to 5 or 10,000. And in that environment, Bitcoin could go to approach zero. I mean, it's got no relationship to anything other than its own speculative mania. And as soon as the buying dries up, this whole thing is going to collapse, regardless of what's happening to inflation, the dollar, gold, or anything else.
So, Peter, we just got done hammering Bitcoin, and I'm very clear on how you feel about it. So let's talk about a potential crash, because a lot of people are saying the crash is impossible. And, I know you study this. Yeah, I mean, I really love your videos, and obviously you're an economist, so you look at things very differently. What do you say to those people?
Well, first of all, clearly a Bitcoin crash is not only impossible or not impossible, it's highly probable, because Bitcoin has already crashed many, many times in its 10-year existence. I mean, you look at how many times the price of Bitcoin has collapsed by 70, 80, 90% or more. I mean, it's probably at least a dozen, maybe more. I'm not really sure. So it has a history of crashing. So I don't know why anybody in Bitcoin would say it can't crash. It's just that up until now, every time it's crashed, it's come back, right? So a lot of people are very complacent. They recognize that Bitcoin can crash at any moment because obviously it's done it so many times in the past. But what they also expect to happen is that after it crashes, it comes back and makes a new high, because that's what it's done every time. But just because it's done that in the past, there is no guarantee that it's going to do that in the future. One of these days, Bitcoin's going to crash and it ain't going to come back. Except you don't know which crash is the last and which crash is just another one in the cycle. And nobody will know for sure until probably many years into the future, looking back at the whole thing. And that is the big problem for these Bitcoin hodlers, right? The guys that are holding on and never sell, because they're so confident that every crash will recover. What happens when you have the last crash and it never recovers? They just hold and hope indefinitely. And then at some point, they keep throwing more good money after bad, expecting Bitcoin to recover, and it just keeps making new lows until they've lost all of their money. So I think a lot of people are going to be completely wiped out with Bitcoin, because they're just going to make the false assumption that just because Bitcoin has recovered from prior crashes, it's going to recover from every crash. Because at some point, it's going to crash for the last time, and it's just going to keep on falling.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, the governments, right? Because they've been kind of sitting back and watching this. And I know, I think you probably saw that China created its own digital currency. It just came out this week. And, they now have a cyber, is it yuan? Is that how they say it? Yuan, I believe?
Yeah, the yuan.
Yeah. So they now have a cyber yuan. And and the Fed is all over this issue. What do you see coming down the road, as some of these governments try to, get back some of this control?
Yeah, well, certainly a digital sovereign fiat currency is much different than Bitcoin, right? So the digital yuan will basically be one for one at all times with the paper yuan. And in fact, the Chinese government has said that they're not going to just simply issue the digital yuan in addition to the paper yuan. They're going to destroy a paper yuan every time they issue one in digital form. So it's not a net increase in inflation, right? The money supply is not going to expand as they create digital yuan. They're simply going to replace some of the paper money supply with a digital money supply. And so basically the Chinese consumers will have a choice. They can carry around paper in their wallet, or they can carry the digital yuan in their smartphones, right? So one or the other. Now, I have a feeling that eventually over time, they will phase out completely the paper. Because if the Chinese government wants to have complete control over the population and know everything that they do, what better way than to force all your transactions online, where the Chinese government knows everything you buy? Right? That way, if you buy something that they don't like, they can arrest you, right? So it's a very oppressive tool. And I don't like this at all. And I don't like the US government having this either. And so, but I think we're going to move in that direction. But I do think that a digital yuan will be very attractive for people around the world to own. because it'll be much easier. Like if you wanted to buy paper yuan right now, what are you gonna do? Go to a bank? I mean, how many US banks can you go into and buy yuan? I mean, probably none, right? But if you could just go online and buy yourself some digital yuan at the prevailing exchange rate, I think that could be a real alternative, much better than Bitcoin, because the digital yuan would be very stable. Yuan is a very stable currency if you look at it. It doesn't vary very much day to day. It's a lot of stability there. I think long term, it's a much better store of value than the dollar. But I think it can really elevate the yuan to be a more international currency, to the extent that people anywhere in the world can decide they want to save Chinese yuan instead of their local currency. I mean, I think it's a much better alternative for people in high inflation countries that want to get out of their own fiat currency. Right now, maybe they would go to Bitcoin, which is extremely volatile and extremely expensive. The yuan would be far more stable and much cheaper to transact in. So I think it could ultimately be a big threat, not only to Bitcoin, but also to the US dollar, to the extent that we don't have a digital dollar and they've got a digital yuan, and more people want to own that instead of the dollar. Then again, it helps diminish the dollar's role.